My name is Joey, and for the past 2.5 years, I've lived full-time on a sailboat in the Caribbean. One thing that I didn't expect about living on a sailboat was just how physical it was going to be. And I don't mean like hoisting sails and hauling up the anchor or anything. I'm just talking about the day-to-day when not sailing. So every day I'm doing motions that I realize aren't typical of day-to-day life for people who live on land. I feel really fortunate to have good health and to be pretty strong because sailboat life would be much harder without those things. If I think through my day and each physical task I have to do, it really starts first thing when I wake up. You kind of have to jump to get in or out of the bed because it sits pretty high up. This is because underneath the bed houses access to the manual rudder control in case the hydraulic steering were to ever go out. Once I'm out of bed, most of my morning routine doesn't involve anything unusual or overly physical, but when I start chores for the day, it definitely does. So in order to take out the trash, I first have to move the companionway steps out of the way, and then I can access the trash can and empty it and replace the bag and everything. After that, I have to lift the full bag up and out of the companionway to get it on deck. Doing laundry is somewhat similar, but for that I don't have to move the steps out of the way, and just once the laundry bag is full, I lift it up and out into the cockpit. My specific sailboat, a Morgan 46, has a pretty large engine room, which is a huge benefit. To get into the engine room, there is some squatting and bending involved to get through the door, but once you're in there, it's actually pretty spacious. There's access to the engine room through the hallway and also through a door in the shower. Fueling up the dinghies involves hauling 5-gallon gas cans back and forth to get to and from the boat. Fuel docks can sometimes be more convenient, but the gas there is notably more expensive than if you just buy it on land. Some private docks have carts for people to use, but otherwise you just have to carry the 5-gallon gas can, which when full is about 30 pounds from the car back to the dinghy to refuel. I think hauling water is the most physical task that happens on a regular basis. 5 gallons of gas will last a while, but 5 gallons of water, it goes really fast. So instead of just moving one jerry can back and forth, I fill up 4 or 5 of water at a time. And that means either loading the empty jerry cans into a dinghy or sometimes a dinghy then a truck, filling them up and then taking them back to the boat. The hard part of all of that is lifting them from the floor of the dinghy all the way up onto the deck of the boat, because that's several feet up. And all doing this while not dropping them in the water. Each of these cans is about 40 pounds when full, which usually wouldn't feel like too much, but lifting them up at that angle is kind of hard. To get out of the cockpit, I climb up on the benches and then step through the bimini frame. And then to get off the boat, it's kind of like climbing down some sort of sketchy ladder. I grab onto the rigging and then step down onto the rub rail, and then I end up in the dinghy. Yes, I've fallen off the boat, but only once, actually pretty recently. I had just finished snorkeling and I was climbing up from the dinghy onto the big boat. My hands and feet were wet and I'm not positive what happened, but I ended up hanging from the rigging and I had a second to weigh whether I should try to muscle myself back up or just fall into the water. And since I was already wet and in a swimsuit, the water was the better option in this case. But here's where I was again very thankful for the strength of my body because I was able to hang on long enough to kick the dinghy out of the way so that I didn't smack into it on my way in the water. So I dropped back in, no big deal, and then climbed back into the dinghy and then up on board. That's another thing that's actually pretty hard. So to get into a dinghy from the water takes some practice. What works for me is kind of launching myself out of the water while kicking, and then I can swing one leg into the dinghy and then I'm good from there. There's no ladder to get up onto the big boat, so the dinghy serves as the ladder. This was a big consideration actually when family has visited. So if you're not used to like making a climbing motion, getting into the boat is pretty hard. A ladder install is becoming pretty high on the project list so that visitors don't have such a hard time. I've also kicked around the idea of upgrading our bosun's chair to accommodate visitors who have a hard time climbing up on board. And at first this was kind of a joke, but the more I think about it, it's actually sort of reasonable. So a bosun's chair is a piece of equipment that can be used to hoist sailors up their mast, to do repairs, or to inspect lines, basically any work that has to be done high up on the mast. So my current bosun's chair is more or less just a piece of wood with padding on it, but they make safer bosun's chairs that have shoulder straps and crotch straps to hold you in more safely. And it kind of sounds ridiculous at first, but it would definitely make the boat more accessible to our friends and family with limited mobility. Let me know in the comments if that is absolutely ridiculous and if you have a better idea. While I generally try to just be grateful every day and appreciative of how my body makes sailboat life possible, I had a major moment of appreciation the other day when one of our boat neighbors had a small accident and dislocated her shoulder and had to be in a sling for several weeks. So while her shoulder was healing, she couldn't climb on or off the boat or drive the dinghy or safely step on or off of docks out of a dinghy without help. So she and her husband ended up having to stay in a marina for several weeks while she healed up. Now she's back and she's all healed, she's good to go, but it was a definite moment of like, wow, this lifestyle is so dependent on what my body can do. So a lot of work happens on deck and inside the boat, but some other work happens underwater. Scrubbing the waterline is a task, and I'm sure there are more effective ways to do this, but I always just tread water while scrubbing. It's also a necessity to check your tackle regularly, which involves diving down to check for chafing and to make sure you're not wrapped up on anything on the bottom if you're on a mooring or if you're on anchor. And if you are on anchor, you have to check that the anchor is set properly. Again, I'm sure some people use additional gear to make this easier, but I just free dive the lines, which can be tiring if you have to make multiple dives to 20 or 30 feet down. I definitely feel accomplished when I do like hard physical tasks like free diving to do underwater projects or just lifting heavy stuff. So these things don't really bother me. And in a way, all of it just kind of adds to the enjoyment of living aboard because all of the hard work makes the easy days feel so much better.